started for our event tonight. So if you'd like to take a seat, please feel free. And I will also ask if you are able to scooch towards the middle. That would be great. We are anticipating a full event tonight, and that really helps us ensure that everyone who needs to sit can sit, and that way there's less disruptions when stragglers are coming in. Thank you so much. Well, good evening. Welcome to tonight's event. My name's Heather. I use they, she pronouns. I'm a bookseller and a gift seller here at the Booksmith. If you're familiar with our store, welcome back. And if it's your first time, welcome in. Some housekeeping before we begin. If you pre-ordered a book, it will be available for pickup at the back counter at the end of the event. If you'd like to purchase one, you can also do that there as well after the event. And just so you know, tonight's event is being live streamed from that iPad right there. As a rule, we try to keep audience members out of the live stream, but if you walk in front of it, you will be in the stream, so just so you know. Our moderator this evening is Elaine St. Elaine is an experienced media relations professional and Emmy Award-winning broadcast journalist with a multi-decade career spanning healthcare, communications, and television news. She recently retired from the Office of Strategic Communication at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston and previously worked for the American Red Cross Northeast Division and St. Francis Hospital and the Medical Center in Hartford. Prior to transitioning into communications and public affairs, she served major TV networks and affiliated local news stations, rising through the ranks as a researcher, news writer, assignment editor, and investigative and special projects executive producer. Currently, she is doing media consulting work, including press release writing, editing, and media interview coaching. Thanks so much for bringing your expertise to tonight's event. Of course, our author this evening is Jeff Karp, PhD. Jeff is an acclaimed mentor and biomedical engineering professor at Harvard Medical School and MIT, a distinguished chair at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Would you mind putting this down a little bit? A distinguished chair at Brigham and Women's Hospital and a fellow of the National Academy of Inventors. He has dedicated his research to bio-inspired medical problem solving, and his lab's technologies have led to the formation of 12 companies. The technologies they have developed include a tissue glue that can seal holes inside a beating heart, targeted therapy for osteoarthritis, Crohn's disease, and brain disorders, smart needles that automatically stop when they reach their target, a nasal spray that neutralizes pathogens, and immunotherapy approaches to annihilate cancer. He was selected as the outstanding faculty undergraduate mentor among all faculty at MIT and the top graduate student mentor of the Harvard MIT students. Tonight we are here to celebrate the release of Jeff's new book, Lit, Life Ignition Tools. Diagnosed with learning differences at a young age, Jeff persisted through nearly insurmountable struggles with support from his mom in developing ways to achieve hyper-awareness and maximize decisions based on his curiosity, passion, creativity, and connection to nature. As a student at McGill University and at the University of Toronto, a researcher at MIT, and a professor at Harvard Medical School, he involved these approaches into Lit, Life Ignition Tools, and road tested these tools daily in his own personal life and with his lab team to innovate medical discoveries inspired by the problem-solving process they find throughout the natural world. Now, Lit is here with the radically simple experimental tools to help anyone tap into a high-energy brain state to fire up innovative potential and shape their lives with intention. That's enough for me for now. Please join in welcoming Elaine St. and Dr. Jeff Karp.
Good evening. How wonderful to see you, so many of you, out this evening. I thank you very much for coming. I can promise you that you are in for a treat because we're going to hear Dr. Jeff Karp share his insight into his new book, Lit, Life Ignition Tools, right here. And we will hear Jeff's journey from childhood, where you heard he struggled with a learning disability, to his life today as a loving husband, devoted father, and brilliant scientist. So we will also have a question and answer period at the end of the hour here. And so have your questions ready, and Dr. Karp will be ready to answer them. What I love about Lit is that it speaks to all of us and outlines how we can act with intention and better achieve purpose and fulfillment. In the book Lit, we also hear stories from a variety of leaders all around the world, which is very interesting. And then Jeff uses the Lit tools that he shares with us in his own life to focus on what is most meaningful, being more present for his family and finding revolutionary solutions to puzzling medical treatment questions in the lab. Many of his answers are his inventions, his innovations are fueled, inspired by nature, a theme found throughout lit. So you'll have to read the book to find out more. Anyhow, Jeff has poured his heart into this book, so let's hear from Jeff. Sit back, relax, and hear for the first time an excerpt from lit.
All right, well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Elaine, for that really nice introduction and the other introduction here as well. It's just such an honor. I'm just so blessed that everyone came out today to hear about lit. You know, I've been working on it for the last 7 years or so. It's been an incredible journey. It's kind of surreal. I feel a little bit like I'm in the Twilight Zone right now to be at the Brookline Booksmith speaking to all of you today. So I really am grateful for that opportunity. So as Elaine said, I'm going to read for the first time from lit, and right from the introduction, One Boy's Journey to Lit. As citizens of the 21st century, we often feel the world is spinning out of control, or at least out of our control. Catastrophe and dysfunction loom large in our minds. Anxiety and depression have been declared public health epidemics. Sometimes the ability to direct our lives seems so far out of our grasp that we just surrender. Unable to focus the way we want or to resist the distractions and demands of the moment, we release ourselves to the torrent and simply react. To the horrific news, to flame-throwing tweets or texts, to advertising and influencers, and to the omnipresent pull of media and social media algorithms with their own agendas. And I say this as an optimist who believes that humans have fundamentally good qualities and do care about other creatures, including one another, and about the health of the planet. Even so, at times, it seems impossible to act with intention and create the lives we truly want to lead. But I'm optimistic for 2 reasons. One is that we're waking up to our place at this moment in time and to our potential as problem solvers on a planetary scale. Science, newly coupled with indigenous knowledge and deep expertise, continues to generate new evidence of the complex interconnections of life on this planet. With our emerging awareness of our role in the ecosystem and the complexities that arise from our choices, which are often damaging, we can see the need for fresh, innovative thinking. We can no longer act as though we don't know what's going on or what's at stake, accepting cultural norms that ignore consequences, muddle our intuitive senses, and immobilize us. We're also increasingly aware that whatever our circumstances, we want our lives to have meaning and purpose. We want our relationships to work and be fulfilling. And we want some happiness in the mix. And we know that we can't wait for someone else to make that happen. We've got to do it for ourselves. Best of all, neuroscience tells us that our brains are up to the task. Plastic and malleable, hungry for the right challenge, our brain is capable of creativity, new knowledge acquisition, and growth, even as we age. This much we own and control. It's our evolutionary inheritance, nature's playbook. We can choose to activate the neural networks that shake our brain awake, flip the switch to enliven our senses, and stimulate our thought processes beyond what we may have imagined possible. Where to start? How do we filter out the noise and distraction, overcome inertia and other obstacles to design the lives we want? How can we regain some control and switch on our innate abilities to focus on what matters most, while still living amid the cacophony of modern life? The best people to teach us how to cope may be the very ones who've struggled the most with attention and learning challenges. many have refined the skills necessary to thrive in a world filled with constant stimulation, distraction, and stress. How do I know this? Because I'm one of them.
So one of those who have refined the skills to survive or thrive in today's world. Would that be right, Jeff?
That's exactly right.
I think it's fascinating also that it's based on science. So explain what we're up against and what is lit.
Sure. So I think that it's important for us to consider what we're truly up against, because I think that it really helps us to frame things in our mind, because it's so easy to shame ourselves for maybe reacting certain ways or behaving certain ways. So for example, currently there's $900 billion that's spent every year on marketing and advertising to hijack our attention. And I think this creates a lot of brain fog. It's really difficult to try to figure out what's important in our lives, because essentially others, large companies, are trying to define that for us. And in addition to this, I think we're also up against some aspects of evolution, some programming, some wiring from 10 or 15,000 years ago when we were all hunters and gatherers, where it was really all about conserving energy, not just physical energy, but also brain energy. And we were outside working all the time, and so it didn't make sense to exercise or to overexert ourselves unless it was for a survival purpose. And so we really have this wiring that makes us gravitate towards this low energy brain state and even a low body kind of energy state. And I think these two things really make it challenging for us today. It's really what we're up against, this idea that our modern society is just filled with all of these algorithms and all this marketing and advertising to define what's important, and then this sort of wiring in terms of 10 or 15,000 years ago when energy conservation, kind of being in that energy saver mode was key.
So being this energy mode or lit mode, that's what you refer to as lit, right?
So lit is really all about resensitizing our aliveness. It's all about how to be human again. And so lit's really organized into, there's 12 tools, and each tool is designed to help us tap into a heightened state of awareness, and really to help us to intercept our routine patterns so that we can actively think and decide versus just jump in with habitual responses.
Yeah. So I want to get back to that because I know that each of the chapters in your book is a tool, and you have said that it doesn't matter what order you read them in. So we'll get back to that, but I want to ask you first, what inspired you to write this book?
So about 7 or 8 years ago, an agent from New York reached out to me and noticed some articles online that had been published on some of the work that we do in my laboratory, in particular for our bio-inspired work, where we turn to nature to bring in fresh ideas into the lab and really to get ourselves into this high energy brain state so that we can solve medical problems. And while I was really interested in potentially writing a book on bioinspiration, there was something else that was really sort of burning within me that I wanted to write about. And if I can here, I want to go back to the 2nd grade where my journey to lit really began. And so what happened in the 2nd grade is that I had undiagnosed ADHD and learning differences. I didn't know it, my parents didn't know it, my teacher certainly didn't know it. And I was sitting at the back of the class, frustrated, angry. I couldn't figure anything out. My mom tried flashcards, she tried phonics, nothing worked. And I kind of felt like an alien, like I just didn't belong, and just wasn't connecting socially with anybody. And so at the end of the year, the teacher, Mr. Steadwell, second grade teacher, held a conference with my parents and said that he would like to hold me back a year to repeat the second grade. And my parents negotiated with him that if I spent the summer with tutors that I could catch up, that I would be able to go on to the third grade. And so all my classmates went on vacation, and here I'm in summer school. And so, I'd go in every day and do a series of activities. And there's one day in particular that was really striking to me that I remember as if it was yesterday. On this day, I went in and the tutor read a passage and asked me some questions. And I gave my answers. And then she did something a little different. She looked at me in the eye and she said, "How did you think about that?" And no one had ever asked me that question before. And it was literally like a light bulb moment, like this flash. This portal opened up, this canvas where I could start thinking about thinking. I had never had that thought before that was possible. Here this impulsive kid who would just say what was ever on his mind and just do, whatever I felt in the moment I should do.
So you found out that your previous answers that you always thought were wrong weren't necessarily wrong. It was just the way you were approaching it. Is that right?
Yeah, it was this whole new process open to me, which eventually led, I think, to better answers because I never understanding what the teacher was asking. I'll give you an example. I don't know how many people have seen the movie Terminator, but there's one scene, I think, from the original Terminator where, and I can't believe I'm referencing Terminator here, but there's this one scene where this screen pops up and there's 4 things that he could say, and then he picks one of the things. He's not quite sure which one. He picks one of the things. So that's how I felt all the time when I was in school. I never really knew what the teacher was asking me. I always could think of multiple answers, and I never knew which one to give. And so what happened after this moment, went on into the third grade, I had this new awareness that I started to bring to everything. And I noticed that when I asked a question, that I could hyper-focus for a few moments afterwards, and that information could imprint in my mind, even over the long term, and I could actually learn. So I realized through this awareness that I needed to ask questions as part of my learning process. And I did this all through, even in high school. I remember I would go in on weekends to meet with teachers to ask questions after school. In college, I stopped going to some classes because I just couldn't keep up because I couldn't ask enough questions. In fact, there was one chemistry class that I went to, and the teacher went through 3 days of derivation of some sort of, I don't even remember what it was, and I recall asking the teacher in front of this class of 750 people if he could go through it a second time, but more slowly, and which he said no. So that's kind of how things emerged.
So let's go on from the second grade. Take us through your whole education process and how you got from a kid with learning difficulties to where you are today. Tell us about that journey.
Sure. So there are a lot of sort of twists and turns and things along the way, but maybe what we'll do is we'll just jump to grad school at University of Toronto. By this time, the year was 2000 and actually it was 1999. And I felt like I was pretty good at asking questions. My whole life was based on sort of evolving my ability to ask questions to learn. But I was about to learn a whole new level of questioning. So what happened was, in the first few weeks of grad school, I sort of learned that one of the things you do is you go to seminar speakers and you listen to the seminars. So I started going, and the one seminar speaker I remember, got to the end, and then the arrows start flying. I'd never seen anything like this. arrows being questions, you know, right to the heart of what the speaker was talking about. And it was like, you know, 3 p.m. sweater vest, arrow, boom, right to the middle of, like, you know, the kind of opened some gap, they found some gap in what the speaker had presented on. And, you know, just arrows just keep flying. And I started thinking to myself, like, why don't I have any of these arrows? I don't have any questions. These questions aren't coming to me. I didn't even own a sweater vest. And so I kind of started to, like, almost shame myself of, like, why am I not thinking of these questions? Why are they not coming into my mind? And I used to play chess with my dad when I was younger, and I think what really separates an amateur chess player from a more advanced player is pattern recognition. And so, you know, expert chess players can see 12, 13, 14 moves ahead. And so I started thinking, oh, maybe I could bring pattern recognition to this. And so at the next seminar, everybody was focused on what the seminar speaker was saying. I was focused on something completely different. I was focused on the questions that people were asking after the seminar speaker finished. And I actually started to write down those questions. And after about 6 to 8 weeks,
What you learned from all of that?
yeah, so after like 6 to 8 weeks of, you know, writing these down, I started to go through them. And I was looking and looking and looking, and then all of a sudden it was like another one of these light bulb moments, because I recognized patterns. There were actually 4 or 5 categories that I could put these questions in. So one group of questions was the experiment, did it actually work? Like, did they, you know, was the setup correct? Some experiments are really complicated, and it's easy to make mistakes in setting up the experiments. Another set of questions focused on the speaker overstating their conclusions, like the data didn't actually support what they were claiming. Another set of questions was on the importance of the results. So sometimes, let's say, if you're developing a diagnostic for blood, and you do all your work in saltwater saline, the results may not actually be important yet because you haven't tested it in the complex, you know, blood system. And then there were questions on statistics and a few other things. But what happened was actually remarkable for me afterwards, because the next seminar speaker I went to, it was like I had my detective hat on. I was trying to poke holes in what this speaker was talking about. And so I was like laser focused on what they're saying. I'm taking notes. The questions that everybody was asking at other seminars, they're coming to my mind. And then also, I was able to tap into creativity, because I started to be able to link knowledge I had in my brain with what they were saying, and I was able to come up with ideas of what they could do next, or other applications of where they might be able to apply their research. And so I realized that asking questions is really a skill that we can get better at any time. And it's really, I think, the key to unlocking our curiosity and developing it further, as well as our creativity.
So asking the right question, is that one of the lit tools?
So yeah, one of the lit tools is live for the questions, and it's really all about how, we really need a tool to activate our neurons and our thinking, and really to determine what is the best next step to take, or how to define importance. And just kind of taking this one step further, one of the questions we ask in my laboratory that I like to ask every meeting is, what's the bar we need to exceed to get everybody excited, right? So in other words, it's kind of like a so what question. Because in academia, it's so easy to just do incremental work. You go to a conference, you read a paper, and you just say, oh, I want to try and do that next. I'll add that into the mix. But I think what we really want to do if we want to maximize impact is we need a North Star. And the North Star, one way to get there is to really just ask, what's the best result that anyone has ever achieved in a particular model? And how much better do we need to do in order to claim success? So it's really sort of thinking critically about the impact that the work potentially could have, because a lot of research that I've seen, and I used to do this as well, it just becomes incremental. It's just so easy to be incremental. And so these high value questions, I think, as we develop questioning as a skill, we start to tune into those high value questions, and they can really open things up as well in our personal lives.
So how, speaking of your lab, how does lit play out in your lab? And then how can you apply that to everybody else in their daily lives?
So we leverage the lit tools on a daily basis. Questioning is a big part of what we do. Another big part of what we do, in science, we actually encounter a lot of failure, a lot of challenges along the way. Most experiments that we conduct actually don't work out. And I think in school, and in the education system, we kind of learn that failure's over here and success is over here, and we should try to avoid failure and maximize success. But in my experience, I've realized that failure in many ways is a prerequisite to success. And so every time that we failed, what I've recognized is that there's this really sort of this emotional phase that overcomes us. It's a really sort of negative place to be because you're putting your heart into the work. But what happens is, and it seems like that's the whole world. It seems as though that's everything. But what I noticed is that if you wait, have a good night's sleep or two, after a day or two, it's almost like an after the rain kind of moment where this window opens where we can do our best thinking and where we come up with ideas. And that's actually where, we file a lot of patents in my lab, and that's where the strongest sort of insights and knowledge and sort of the bulk of the key to the patents, and it's like where we get our best ideas. When we fail, it's like this opportunity to be creative, and then we start being creative, and it's like we do better thinking after a failure moment than in the beginning of a project. And so that's something that we really embrace a lot in the laboratory, is constructive failure. Looking at it as how can we design experiments knowing we're likely going to fail, but we just need to gain some insight, some knowledge that can help direct us a little bit more down the path.
That's something that definitely can apply to all of our lives, I think. So you had talked about low energy brain state. Can you tell us what that is? Doesn't sound good. Is it something that we should overcome, and how should we do that?
So the low energy brain state is, and the reason I call it that is really just how I feel when I'm in that state, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about just a little earlier, which is this sort of gravity towards our brain being in energy saver mode. And you might relate to it from some of these examples, how many times do you walk into a room and then forget the reason that you walked into that room? Or how many times did you drive your car from point A to point B, and you get to B and you can't even remember the path that you took, the route you took, or maybe you're eating a meal and you get to the end, you're kind of shocked that it's over. These are what I refer to as the low energy brain state. And
would it be like you change the password on your phone and then you keep putting the old password in? That's exactly it.
That's exactly it. And so I think we can start to relate, or when we lose our keys and we find it's in our pocket, for example. All these are sort of, and I think that it's so easy to try to shame ourselves when that happens, but again, I feel like there's this evolutionary basis for being in this kind of energy saver mode. It's actually trying to help us, but I think there are ways that we can turn to tools to bring our brains into a high energy brain state where we do our best thinking. Because if we don't have tools to do that, then we just end up repeating the same patterns. We end up kind of getting into a rut, and I think it really can negatively impact our relationships, as well as bringing creativity and a sense of wellness to our lives.
So give us some ideas on how we can change those patterns.
So there are a lot of ways to change those patterns, and I think I think of it in terms of the tools. So the tools in LIT, it's really a set of 12 holistic tools. You can use them together, and some of the tools can help us, for example, flood our brains with positive neurotransmitters to really make us feel good. You know, when we're moving, that's what happens. You know, we have dopamine and serotonin and all kinds of great neurotransmitters. And so I really look at, for example, exercise as a way to help us, to get us into a positive mood, into a positive state that allows us to then intercept patterns, because it takes a little bit of work, you know, to intercept our patterns and to rewire our brains. And so we have to feel good about it. We also need tools to help us to practice. Often when we think of practicing, we may think it's monotonous. We may think that, I don't want to practice. It can get really boring. And so to me, one of the tools is called fall in love with practice. I think there are ways that we can bring joy to practicing. And actually, maybe I'll give an example of that. So one of the people that I interviewed for the book, his name is Nelson Dellis, and he's the 5 times US memory champion. And he spoke about how when he was younger, he really didn't think he had a good memory. And one of his family members got Alzheimer's disease. And so what happened is he kind of felt this gravity towards improving his memory because he didn't want that to happen to him. And so he started to engage in various practices, and he started to engage in this one practice where essentially a lot of what he does is with a deck of cards. So he can actually take a deck of cards in a random order and memorize the order within like 40 seconds. So that's like, I think what the U.S. memory champion needs to do. And so he kind of, what he does is he will take the cards and assign each card to a family member. So his wife might be like the Queen of Diamonds, and his dad the King of Hearts, and so on. And then it's called like a memory palace. And so he envisions like his house, and then based on the order, he knows he might have like a shelf when he walks into his house, and so he'll basically in his mind put the cards in different places around his house as he walks through it, and that's how he can remember. And so I asked him, I said, Nelson, how do you make practice like fun? Because if you're just doing this all day long, it's got to get boring, right? And he said, well, what he does is he actually will add a card or two to the deck every once in a while to add sort of like a new challenge, like to kind of to startle him. And he said that was one of the ways that he brings joy to practicing. And so it just made me think that, whenever we engage in practice, if we feel bored about it, or we think it's monotonous, that there's so many possibilities of infusing like fresh energy and some of these little tricks that we can do to make it feel good. Someone else that I interviewed, Molly Gerbian, is a neuroscientist, and she also plays musical instruments. And she said to me something really striking, which is she said, if you have an hour to practice something, most people will just practice it for the full hour. But she said what the neuroscience data shows is that it's better to practice for 15 minutes, take a 5-minute break, and then keep doing that. Because she said for the practice really to rewire our brains, to turn mind into matter, that happens actually in between. That happens during the pauses. It doesn't happen when you're actually practicing. And then she said the other thing that's also striking is when you take that break and you come back, it actually startles your brain because you don't remember everything. And that startle effect actually puts your brain into a high energy state so that you can then be hyper-focused and have greater sort of imprinting of that skill in your mind.
Okay. So your book here, under Lit Life Ignition Tools, it says, use nature's playbook to energize your brain, spark ideas, and ignite action. So can you talk about nature's playbook and how we should pay attention to that?
Absolutely. So nature has really played a major role in my life from a very early age. When I was in the 3rd grade, we moved out to the country, and I'm talking like real country. We had a sheep farm beside us, buffalo farm across the road, and there was a farmer's field in my backyard. and there was a creek. We had, I'd wake up in the middle of the night. This happened several times, and there'd literally be a pack of wolves on my front lawn, heading over to the sheep farm. And our driveway was 1,000 feet long, carved through a forest. And so I would get off the bus every day kind of feeling drained and exhausted because it was a bit of a struggle back then. And and have a lot of negative thoughts in my mind when I got off the bus. But every day as I walked along this path, I would just feel like it almost felt like nature was hugging me, because I would just, there were no phones or anything. So I would just stare at the trees and the leaves and the animals and, that was there. And I just felt like it was just this sense of solace just kind of came over me. And so, and that really stuck with me for my whole life. And I think, there's elements of nature that I think are really important for us to learn about and to think about maybe even on a daily basis. So for example, in nature, there really is no end goal. It's just constant changes that are happening in the environment and adaptation, over time. I think that we often in our lives, we tend to be very goal focused. And I think that if we can learn from nature that it's not so much about an end goal, it's more about the adaptation and the perturbations and the learning. And when we're learning, our brains are lit up, literally glows orange on an MRI. And so, I've kind of been bringing that into my life. Like, for example, I gave a talk at Stanford on the book a month or two ago, and I went to go give this talk, and I never talked about lit before. I never, and I put it together, and I brought all the processes I could to it, and I went and I delivered it, and I think it went okay, but I started looking at it, and I said, you know what, I could shame myself because, I had set like a really high bar, right, for things. But I was like, you know what, I'm going to think about this like nature. This is a Generation 1.0 talk. And by tuning into the audience and really sort of getting a feel for what they're connecting with and what they're not connecting with, I'm going to incorporate those thoughts into my next presentation. And this is probably going to be a Generation 10 and a Generation 20, and it's just going to keep getting better. And I'm going to keep being able to connect with people, like, through this. And so that's sort of one element, I think, in our lives of how we can look to nature as this sort of constant evolution. And we have these capabilities. So we're born with this incredible prefrontal cortex, this front part of our brain that I think is like the largest when you consider the ratio with the whole brain size. And then we have this incredible neuroplasticity that we have at our disposal, so our ability to rewire our brains throughout life. And I just think that we're using such little amount of this human machinery that we all have. And maybe just one other element to this is the incredible interconnectedness of everything in nature.
Right.
And I just feel like when we start to embrace that and develop an interconnected mindset, we really can feel that support of everything, all of nature around us. And it's like something we're contributing to, but we're also depending on. So I just think there's so much to learn from in nature, and so the tools are really based, and that's why we call it, that's why I call it Nature's Playbook.
So I want to give the audience a chance to ask some questions. I just want to say there's so much in your book, it's really hard to cover it in this short time that we have. And I find it fascinating that you have examples of people who have changed their whole lives. Maybe they're in one job and they think it's, they're not utilizing all of their talents. And with the help of your tools, they're able to just change and do something that they've always dreamed of. So it's very, very inspiring. But, so the last thing I want to ask you before we turn over to the audience is, what tools can we practice tomorrow? What can we take with us and do tomorrow to improve?
So one thing that I've been doing a lot lately as a practice that I think is really easy for people to do, a simple kind of first step, and I think you can kind of think of lit as just lots of on-ramps. First kind of steps to take no matter where you're at. in your life. And so one of the things I do is when I walk our two dogs, I cycle through my senses. And so I'll walk around our neighborhood and I'll say sight, and I'll look at the texture of the bark on the trees, and I'll look at the leaves and the clouds, and I'll look at the squirrels and the birds. And then I say hearing, and I'll listen for the birds, and I'll listen for other sounds, the wind sort of rustling in the leaves. And then I say touch, and I'll feel my heels hit the ground and my toes, and I'll feel maybe the clothing on my skin, and I'll feel the wind on my face. And to me, this is a way of resensitizing my aliveness. It's a way of, I think that our culture atomizes our attention, it cubes our time, and like social media, and flattens our imagination. And I think that we really need tools to resensitize how we experience the world, and our experiences are based on our senses. And so through this practice, I feel I've been able to resensitize my senses. And it's allowed me to connect more deeply with what I'm seeing and experiencing, and developing more of an interconnected mindset.
Okay, so questions. Who would like to go first? I'm sure you must have lots of questions. No questions? Yes.
Hey Jeff, so which of the tools that you've written about do you think are the least intuitive, like most counterintuitive?
Question.
Yeah, that is a really good question. Well, I think one of the tools is called Get Bothered, and it's really about how getting in touch with the pain points in our life can actually be a motivator. So a simple example would be several years ago, I had this, my laboratory was based near MIT, and I was given this opportunity to move my lab to the Longwood medical area. And I was trying to figure out whether we should do it or not, because we had a lot of students coming from MIT, and it was just really easy for them to get to the lab, and the space was really incredible. And I started thinking about it, and I realized that that one of the pain points in what we're doing, we're developing medical therapies. And how amazing would it be if every time we walk into the lab, we would actually see patients? And so it's almost like there's this a social justice activist, Brian Stevenson, and he says stay proximate, that we want to stay proximate to the problems that we're passionate to solve. And so to me, there may be some counterintuitiveness that we want to get close, we want to sort of get close with those pain points. We want to, because we tend to be, there's an aversion to pain points, right? Like we will do anything to stop the pain. But I think that I think that Get Bothered, this tool, it sort of allows us to develop a relationship with the pain points where you can actually tap it as a motivator to help us on our course towards doing the intentional work we're trying to do.
Any other questions? Yes.
Would you say that this book could have helped your teacher when you were young? Did the teacher would have read your book?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think that, I mean, when you say teacher, I mean, there's a lot of teachers that I had. I'll just give you a few experiences. I'll give you examples of a few teachers who I think the book could have helped. Okay?
No names.
No names, no names. Okay. So there was one time where, I was like pretty extreme in terms of my distractibility with ADHD. And one of the teachers actually put like blinders on my desk so I couldn't see very far in front of all the other kids. And so, I was kind of made fun of a lot. So I think that teacher might be able to be helped in some ways. And then there were teachers that called me lazy. At one point, I was helping another another classmate do something, and the teacher came up to me and said that was like, they said, oh, that's like the blind leading the blind. I think that teacher could be helped by it. And I think, you know, I ended up in the principal's office a lot. I was a bit of a troublemaker. But yeah, I think that, you know, sort of broadly speaking, I think to me, lit is really about how to be human again. It's about, it's about sort of developing an awareness of the patterns that are really holding us back and giving us really simple steps and ways to recognize that and to then start to change those patterns and then make them into habits.
Yeah. Just reading the table of contents here, each chapter is a tool, and it's very interesting. We'll definitely all have to buy a book. So, any more questions? Serena?
What do we do when we're not able to practice enough, or when we realize that we're not able to use a tool in the way we should do? Like, how do we handle that? I don't want to call it failure, but how do we handle like not being able to work that much in each tool?
If you feel like you can't reach your potential?
Yeah.
If she said, if you feel like you cannot accomplish one of the tools, like what if you feel like you can't reach your potential, what can you do about it? So.
Yeah, so I would say that that I look at everything as iterative, right? And so there is kind of what I was saying a little bit before, like that there is no, I try not to look at things as end goals, like things have to be, or I try not to have also expectations for a particular goal. And there's the process of just, and you know, we experience this in the lab as well, there's just this process of experimenting. I would almost look at it as experimentation. You know, we're looking at experimenting with the tools. Sometimes I forget to use the tools, or I know I haven't, you know, something happens, but, you know, there's cues that we get from our minds, from our bodies, from our interactions with other people. And to me, it's just very liberating and empowering to know that maybe in a certain situation, I could have done better, but that I can do better next time, and that I can start to develop a habit, and if I keep doing it, it will eventually, you know, become easier and will become more instinctual. And I think that's really it.
And Jeff, maybe activation energy is a good trick. You want to talk about activation energy?
Sure. So back in, I think it was a chemistry or physics class, actually I think it was chemistry a number of years ago, back in high school, maybe even elementary school, I learned about this concept of activation energy. And so essentially the way to think of it is like if you have like a beaker of water and you have two molecules, let's say in that beaker, and nothing's really happening, and you add some heat to it, and they start moving around more, and then you add more heat, and now they're really moving, and you add a little more heat, and then they collide and form, a reaction occurs, a chemical reaction. Now you have a new molecule that forms. The amount of heat, the amount of energy you put into that system is the activation energy, the amount of energy required for a reaction to occur. And so when I learned about that, I was like, oh my God, I could apply this to like all these different areas of my life. So I'll give you an example. So last summer, my friend Michael Gale, where is he? There he is. He did something very dangerous. He called me while he was riding his bike, okay? And he said, Jeff, being on my bike is my happy place. And I immediately thought, wow, that's unsafe. But I also thought, you know, it's my happy place too. I've always loved going out on my bike. Like I feel as free as a bird, you know, riding my bike around. And I was like, wait a moment, I have a bike. Why am I not riding my bike? It's been in my garage for like a year. And I knew that if I set the goal of getting on the bike that day, that I was just gonna set myself up for failure. In fact, I feel like we often practice not achieving our goals because we set the goal to be too high, too much energy, too much activation energy, and then we don't achieve it, and then we just repeat that pattern. And so what I did is I said, okay, I'm gonna lower the activation energy for this in steps. And so one day I just cleaned up my bike. And I didn't let myself do anything else. I just cleaned it up because I knew I'd kind of have a bit of an itch to do more, but I cleaned it up. And then the next day, I put air in the tires. And then the next day, I moved the bike to where I would see it right beside the car every day, and I hung the helmet on the handlebars. And so I had lowered the activation energy to the point where the only energy I needed to put in this was to find 10 or 15 minutes to get on the bike and go around the neighborhood a couple times. And last summer, I biked over 1,000 miles.
That's great, that's great. Terrific. Okay, any more questions? Yes, back there.
Hi, Jeff. So wellness is sort of become a big topic in schools, and schools are thinking about that. And I think you're living with the duality of having this book and then also having a teenage child. And I'm curious about this. Let's say you were advising a school that your child was at or their friends were at. How, and you thinking about this role of which way teenagers might react to some of these things, what might be like one of the tools that you would suggest for folks that are talking about wellness that might not get like the eye rolls from the teenagers that you know and exist in your life?
Wow, that's a great
You have
question.
teenagers.
Yeah, I know I have teenagers. Yeah, a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old. I think that I might want to answer that later. No. Yeah, no, it's such a great question, and I feel like I want to think more deeply about that one. Yeah, to give a good answer.
You can chat afterwards.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
You got me on that one for, yeah.
Yes.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for being here. We're really good friends, so I'm excited and heard so much about this book. So my question for you tonight is, what was your biggest surprise when you were writing this book? I know it took many years. I knew it took you many, but I was, if you had to summarize about one thing that really surprised you.
Yeah.
What would it be?
So I had a co-writer that I wrote this book with, Teresa Barker, and we spoke every day. And the thing I think that surprised me the most is how, because I had been taking notes my whole life on processes and things as I was navigating, my wife Jessica reminded me that when we met, I actually would have these notebooks in my pocket that I would just be writing things down. And so when I started to think I would write a book, I thought I had everything in these notebooks. But what I didn't really think about was how much I was going to learn about life from Teresa. And she's just such a world maker. She just has I feel like she just is connected to what I believe is most important. And as we were writing, she was also teaching me about how certain ways of saying things can isolate people, and there's just so much that goes into every word and every sentence. And so it was this remarkable experience, and she would send me articles every day, current events and other things that she was reading that I never thought I would be so into that, just outside of my field, and it was, to me, it was just this incredible experience to learn about the world from her and about communication and all of these sort of deeper levels of writing.
Are you working on any fun projects in the lab you'd like to talk about or share while you're here?
Sure. One of the most recent projects in the lab is a nasal spray. So when COVID hit, one of the questions, coming back to questions that we asked, is something that we were inspired actually by Vivek Murthy, who's a Surgeon General. And when he became the Surgeon General the first time, he went on this listening tour around the country, and he went around and he asked people, "How can I help?" And that actually led to him putting these reports together that no Surgeon General had ever, had written on substance use and misuse disorders and the loneliness epidemic. And so when COVID hit, we asked this question, how can we help? And we were developing a nasal spray to treat multiple sclerosis because there's a lot of immune cells in the nasal lining. And we thought, okay, some of the data started to emerge about how COVID spreads. And we have these receptors on goblet cells in our nasal lining that's a main entry point for the COVID virus, and actually a main entry point for many airborne pathogens to infect us. And so we started to think, well, maybe we could take what we had developed with the nasal spray and tailor it to be a prophylactic for airborne pathogens. And so essentially what we were able to do is we developed a spray which is a gel that coats the lining of the nose and actually forms a physical barrier. We learned as COVID went on, that it spread via droplets, and so we designed a 3D printed mold of a nasal cavity that we used to test the aerosol properties of this. We screened 100 different formulations. We picked things that were only on the generally recognized as safe list, so we could bring it to market really quickly, so there were no drugs present. And essentially, we were able to develop a nasal spray that we could get a 5-log reduction in basically 99.99% kill of COVID-19, H1N1, influenza A and B, adenovirus, E. coli, RSV, and a form of pneumonia. And this is in laboratory conditions, but we've gone on to demonstrate that this is really a broad spectrum spray. So we brought this to market in October. I actually sort of launched it at a conference out west, and now we're starting to do more of the studies and figure out if we can do some human studies to demonstrate the effectiveness. But based on what we've heard thus far, people who usually get sick when they get on planes or when their partner gets sick, they usually get sick. Like, it seems to be really helping a lot of people. But we still need to do more rigorous analysis of that.
Wow, that's fascinating. Well, I know we're pretty much at the end of our time, so does anyone want to squeeze in one more question before we say goodnight here? Well, not quite goodnight, because Dr. Karp is going to sign books for whoever would like to have their book signed. But any last question? Going once, going twice? Okay.
Thank you, you were wonderful, I could listen to you all day.
Just one thing before we close, but I just want to really thank everybody for coming from the bottom of my heart. It really means a lot to me that you came out tonight to hear about this, I can't really believe it actually, that everyone's here to listen to us and to learn about lit. But I'm just so grateful and thank you for sharing the evening with me, and thank you, Elaine. So it's thank you to the Brookline Booksmith as well. So.
Okay.